She was tortured and burned alive by her friends. This is the story of the most sadistic murder in UK history, that of Suzanne Capper. And of course, trigger warning, there's gonna be some gory stuff in here. As anyone that goes through a hard time or a friendless childhood does, Suzanne really craved connection. That of a best friendship, a relationship, whatever it might be. Born in 1976, Suzanne had a rather damaging childhood, as in her father left her right after her birth and her mother Elizabeth did not love her, and made that very clear. Elizabeth married a man named John who had a daughter, and that marriage ended in 1990, and Suzanne was left to be raised by John, not her own mother. Even though John tried to be there and support Suzanne as much as he could, she just felt this deep emptiness inside of her. That emptiness that needed connection, that needed friendship. And it caused her to act out, skipping school, hanging around the wrong crowd. She started spending most of her time at 97 Langworthy Road. This is the very house that would end up being the death of her. This house belonged to 26-year-old Jean Powell, who Suzanne had known since she was 10 years old. Suzanne quickly became intertwined with Jean's friends, who were either convicted of armed robbery, drug addicts, sex addicts, bad stuff, you name it. So this was a really bad situation because Suzanne felt like she needed to do everything that they told her to. She had a really kind soul and they were able to manipulate her in ways that were just really horrible. It was in December of 1992 when the group blamed Suzanne for a lice infestation, even though it was Anthony's fault because he was sleeping with everyone in the friend group. They kidnapped her and began to beat her and torture her. She was first beaten by Jean, and she actually escaped and ran to her mother's house and asked for help. But her mother, Elizabeth, the amazing human being she is, said, no, I can't help you. My boyfriend won't like it. Feeling pretty hurt by this, Suzanne finally returned to John's home, but was coerced back to the friend group house by the group saying that a guy that she had a crush on was there. But it turns out he wasn't, and she was promptly tied up, a bag put over her head, and tortured for a long period of time. Part 2 of Right Away, this is where I'm going to get into some of the gory details, not all of them, so please just be conscious, be aware before you watch it. If you get triggered by these things, just end it here. This is part 2 of the murder of Suzanne Capper. This is really where the trigger warning comes in for gore, torture, all that stuff. So stop watching if you don't want to hear any of it. So at this point in the story, Suzanne is being locked in a cupboard after the group put a bag over her head and beat her with wooden spoons, resulting in one of her arms getting broken. They realized that her screams were too loud and they didn't want to wake Jean's children. So they moved her down to Bernadette's house that was empty. They held her captive for 5 days in Bernadette's house and subjected her to horrendous forms of torture. They burned her face and body with cigarettes, pulled out her front teeth with pliers, and she was basically living in her own feces. And when that smell became too strong for everyone, they put her in a bathtub filled with disinfectant. This murder actually was called the Chucky murders because they strapped headphones to her head that played the Chucky films on repeat. I'm Chucky, you want to play? Really just horrible things. If this short list gives you an idea, it's not even half of it. After not hearing from Suzanne for a while, John filed a missing persons report, which did anything but help. The group realized they had to get rid of Suzanne, so they drove her to this area with an embankment, poured gasoline over her, and set her on fire, all while chanting, "Burn, baby, burn, baby, burn." Horrendous. Suzanne actually survived being burned alive and hobbled up the road where she was found by a man named Barry Sutcliffe, who took her to the hospital. She told him what happened and unfortunately did not survive. She passed away 4 days later in the hospital with John by her side. After her death, police raided the house and arrested all of these horrendous human beings. They found overwhelming evidence that they had in fact tortured Suzanne, including her hair, her teeth, blood, stuff like this. And these people got what was coming to them. Here's the fun part, though. Jean had only 2 years in prison. Bernadette, Jeffrey, and Clifford have all since been released, along with Jean. So, yay, awesome, fantastic. What do you guys think? Let's talk about it in the comments right now.
This case of stolen identity will break your heart.
Imagine you're 11 years old and your identity has been stolen for the first time. You don't know anything about it until you're 19 years old, and you try and rent your first apartment, but you can't because you have a terrible credit score. Then you discover you're $500,000 in debt. That would be a complete nightmare, right? Well, now imagine the person who did this to you was your mother. That was the case for Axton Betts Hamilton. Her mother had been using her identity for years to get credit cards, buy properties, and was essentially leading a double life. What makes things even sadder is when Axton discovered what her mother had been doing, she had sadly passed away, so she could never ask why. And all the money she had borrowed had vanished. Axton ended up getting justice and went on to actually become an advocate for child stolen identity. Today, she believes her mother might have been a low-grade psychopath. If you want to hear more true story, hit that plus button.
This case definitely has some sensitive content in it, so here is your trigger warning now. This is 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle, and on June 21st of 2013, she was abducted from a Walmart. Now, as a background story, Rain Periwinkle is Cherish's mother, and she also has 3 other daughters, including Cherish. Now, her and her husband had recently divorced, and she was just really struggling at the time financially, and she took her kids on June 21st of 2013 to a Dollar General to shop for some clothes and things that they needed. At the checkout at the Dollar General, Rain was struggling to find enough money in her purse to pay for all of the children's clothing. This is where 56-year-old Donald James Smith comes into the story. Now, at the checkout, Donald offered Rain to take her and her children to Walmart nearby and buy her and her children all some outfits and basic essential items that they needed. And he said that he had some gift cards and that his wife would meet them pretty shortly after at Walmart to shop with them. Rain felt uncomfortable and a little skeptical about the situation, but she decided to go ahead with Donald because of the fact that she felt comforted that he had a wife that was on her way to the Walmart as well. This is all CCTV footage from Walmart of Donald at Walmart with Rain and her 3 children, and specifically Cherish. It was getting close to 10 p.m. and Donald's wife had not shown up yet, and the children were getting pretty hungry, so Donald offered to go next door to McDonald's and buy Rain and her daughters a meal to get them by until his wife got there. Now, when Donald went to the McDonald's next door, he took Cherish with him. Like and follow for a part 2. Part 2, and as I said before, extreme trigger warning. Now, we left off with Donald taking Cherish to McDonald's next door to get the family some food. It had been over an hour, and Rain, Cherish's mother, finally calls 911 and tells them that her daughter had been basically kidnapped by Donald. Police immediately put out a huge Amber Alert for Cherish, and during that time, one of Donald's friends actually called the police and explained to them what Donald's van looks like. The day after Cherish was abducted by Donald at 9 a.m., police saw Donald's van on the highway, so they immediately pulled him over and arrested him. But at the same time of his arrest, a witness called the police and told them that they saw what looked like Donald's van behind a church nearby. Now, sadly, police immediately go to the church and they find behind the church Cherish's body. Trigger warning once again, when they found Cherish's body, she had ant bites all over her, she was pretty badly mutilated, and she had bursted blood vessels all throughout her neck due to strangulation. Now, the autopsy report showed that she was sexually assaulted and that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the back of the head and strangulation with a t-shirt that Donald had used. And he had used such strong force that it caused her to bleed out of a lot of places in her face. This case was just so traumatizing that when they were in trial, the medical examiner who had to do a testimony actually had to quickly leave the room because he was just so shooken up. Now, during trial, a lot of things came out. For one, Donald lied. He absolutely did not have a wife. And also, he had a long criminal history of being basically a pedophile. Now, eventually, he was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault against Cherish. And he was put in jail for life and put on death row. Now, it boils my blood. He had absolutely no remorse for what he did. Only 2 days into trial, the prison had captured cell recordings of Donald talking to his cellmate. In one of the recordings, Donald's telling his cellmate about these two young girls that he saw during visitation, and he's telling his cellmate, and I quote, "That's right up my alley. That's my target area. I would like to run into them at Walmart." He tried to fight his death sentence just last year, and thank God the Supreme Court actually rejected it. I hope he rots. This is the worst case of a betrayal of a friend I have ever heard of. And I am going to put a trigger warning for extreme torture. This is 30-year-old Jennifer Dardy from Pennsylvania. Now, Jennifer's family described her as very bright and bubbly and happy. She was also mentally disabled, and she had the capacity of about a 4-year-old, which unfortunately made her very trusting of people. Now, February 11th of 2010, Jennifer was invited for a sleepover at Peggy's house. Her friend Angela had invited her, and they had been friends for several years at this point. Jennifer's dad dropped her off at a bus station so she could take the bus to Peggy's house. But once Jennifer walked through the door of Peggy's apartment, things turned bad very quick. Once Jennifer walked through the door, she was very quickly attacked by these 6 people: Robert, Ricky, Melvin, Amber, Peggy, and her friend Angela. And Jennifer was good friends with Angela, but only acquaintances with the rest. From that point on, Jennifer went through 36 hours of torture. Peggy and Angela took turns beating Jennifer with a towel rod and a crutch. They also made her drink nail polish, cooking oil, laundry detergent, and even urine. They also shaved her head and painted her face with nail polish. They also stole all of her belongings in her purse. And during this 36-hour ordeal, Jennifer was tied and handcuffed with Christmas lights. And Melvin Knight up here on the top sexually assaulted Jennifer while Amber and Peggy beat her. Now, after hours and hours of torture, they gave Jennifer sleeping pills and antibiotics. Now, while Jennifer was sleeping, all 6 of these pieces of work took a vote to actually kill her instead of releasing her so she wouldn't go and tell anybody what happened. So they decided their next step was to force Jennifer to write a fake suicide note. Afterwards, Melvin decided to begin to stab her in the chest. Ricky then joined in and cut her wrists. Then Ricky and Melvin, both together, strangled her to death with Christmas lights. Once Jennifer was dead, they tied her body up in Christmas decor, put her in a trash can, and then dumped her body in a school parking lot. Shortly after, a truck driver comes across Jennifer's body and immediately calls police. And police immediately take all 6 of them into custody. During trial, they find out that Angela lured Jennifer to the apartment because she was jealous that Jennifer wanted a relationship with her boyfriend Ricky. They are all found guilty. Angela is sentenced to life with no parole. Ricky is sentenced to death row. Amber gets 40 to 80 years. Peggy gets 35 to 74 years. Robert gets 30 to 70 years. And Melvin also gets death row. Jennifer was truly a bright soul, and I hope they all rot in prison.